The birth of autonomous vehicle. Chapter 1, The Ghost in the Machine, a vision ahead of its time. Welcome to Synapse Daily. Today we are stripping away the sleek, polished chrome of modern Tesla showrooms and the lidar-heavy sensors of Waymo's Google-born fleet. We are traveling back to a year that felt like the future, yet lived in the analog, 1975. Picture this. The world is in a state of profound flux. The Vietnam War had just drawn to a close, leaving a massive vacuum in military strategy. Microsoft was being founded in a garage. The first personal computer, the Altair 8800, was appearing on the covers of hobbyist magazines. But while the public was just learning how to blink an LED light on a circuit board, a group of quiet giants at DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, were proposing something that sounded like pure, unadulterated witchcraft. They proposed a ghost. A machine that could think, move, and navigate through a chaotic world without a single human hand on a steering wheel. In 1975, the autonomous land vehicle wasn't a prototype yet, it was a manifesto. It was a formal challenge to the limits of human engineering. DARPA didn't just want a remote-controlled car. They wanted an artificial intelligence that could look at a rocky hillside in Virginia or a muddy plain in Europe and say, "I know where I am, and I know where I must go." Think about the sheer audacity of this. We are talking about an era where a high-end computer filled an entire climate-controlled room. The idea of putting that much processing power into a moving vehicle was like trying to fit a library inside a matchbox. Yet, these researchers weren't deterred. They were obsessed with the ghost in the machine. They knew that if they could separate the human biological frailty, the fear, the fatigue, the slow reaction times, from the mechanical body of a vehicle, they would change the face of humanity forever. Chapter 2, The Cold War Pressure Cooker, Strategy of the Invisible. Welcome back to Synapse Daily. We're delving deeper into the crucible of the 1975 DARPA autonomous vehicle concept. To truly grasp the urgency and the audacity of this vision, we must first immerse ourselves in the geopolitical climate of the mid-1970s. This wasn't merely an academic pursuit or a technological curiosity. It was a direct response to existential threats, a desperate need born from the chilling realities of the Cold War. The year 1975 found the United States in a complex position. The costly and divisive Vietnam War had just concluded, leaving a scar on the nation's psyche and military strategy. Yet, the larger, more ominous shadow of the Soviet Union loomed larger than ever. The USSR boasted an overwhelming numerical superiority in conventional forces, particularly in armored divisions across Eastern Europe. The Pentagon strategists were haunted by a single, terrifying scenario, the Fulda Gap. This relatively flat, low-lying corridor in West Germany was considered the most likely invasion route for Soviet tanks into Western Europe. A conflict here would be devastating, with projected casualty rates for human tank crews reaching catastrophic levels. In this grim landscape, DARPA's proposal for an autonomous land vehicle emerged not as a luxury, but as a strategic imperative. The agency sought a force multiplier, a technology that could amplify military capabilities without putting human lives at immediate risk. Imagine the tactical advantage: autonomous reconnaissance vehicles that could scout enemy positions in heavily defended areas without a single soldier exposed. Or, perhaps even more critically, machines that could operate effectively in environments rendered lethal to humans by nuclear, biological, or chemical (NBC) weapons. The concept wasn't about automating a drive to the grocery store, it was about designing machines for survival in the most extreme, hostile conditions imaginable. But the ambition of the 1975 proposal went beyond mere remote control. DARPA wasn't interested in a drone that an operator controlled from a bunker, they envisioned a machine with true tactical autonomy. This meant the vehicle wouldn't just follow a pre-programmed route, it would understand the intent of its mission. If its primary road was blocked by debris or a destroyed bridge, it wouldn't simply stop and wait for human intervention. It would reason, is there an alternate path? Can I bypass this obstacle off-road? Is that patch of dense foliage a potential ambush point, or merely part of the natural terrain? This level of decision-making, in real time, under combat conditions, demanded an artificial intelligence far beyond anything then commercially available. The minds at DARPA, influenced by pioneers like Marvin Minsky and John McCarthy from the nascent field of AI, recognized that the next great conflict might not be won by the sheer mass of steel and manpower, but by the agility and resilience of silicon brains. They were drafting the blueprints for what would later be termed the electronic battlefield, a domain where machines were not just tools, but intelligent agents capable of independent action and complex strategic thought. The 1975 concept paper thus became a landmark document, formally acknowledging that artificial intelligence was not merely a fascinating academic pursuit, but a fundamental strategic necessity for national security and the very survival of the Western world. It was the moment the promise of AI transcended laboratories and entered the high-stakes world of global defense. Chapter 3: The Engineering Nightmare, Perception versus Reality. Now, let's peel back the layers and confront the sheer, brutal reality of trying to bring such a visionary concept to life in 1975. Talking about a self-driving car in an era of rotary phones and 8-track tapes sounds almost comical. Building one? That was an absolute engineering nightmare, a struggle against the very limits of computing and sensor technology. In 1975, the state of computer vision was, by modern standards, rudimentary at best. To an early computer, a black and white image wasn't a recognizable scene, it was a vast, indigestible grid of numbers, pixels, each representing a shade of gray. There were no graphics processing units, GPUs, to accelerate image processing, no pre-trained neural networks, just raw, painstaking algorithmic logic running on central processing units, CPUs, that struggled with basic arithmetic. The DARPA proposal identified the single greatest hurdle: perception. How do you teach a machine to see and interpret the chaotic, infinitely varied real world? Imagine being that early computer. You have a crude television camera mounted on a rugged truck chassis. You receive a patch of dark gray pixels on the ground. Is it merely a shadow cast by an overhead cloud or a tree? Or is it a 6-foot-deep trench, capable of swallowing the vehicle whole and ending the multi-million-dollar experiment in a cloud of dust and failure? If the computer guessed wrong, the consequences could range from a minor inconvenience to catastrophic equipment loss. The researchers had to invent image understanding from scratch. They began developing algorithms for edge detection, the process of identifying the boundaries between objects by detecting sharp changes in pixel intensity. They needed to teach a machine what a road looked like. But in 1975, roads were not always pristine asphalt. They were often dirt tracks, gravel paths, muddy ruts, or overgrown grass. The computer had to learn to generalize from ambiguous visual data, a task still challenging for today's sophisticated AI. The processing power required for even these basic tasks was astronomical. To process a single frame of video, just one still image from the camera, could take several minutes on the available hardware. Early vision systems, like those developed at the Stanford AI Lab, SAIL, for the Stanford cart, moved with such agonizing slowness that one could literally watch the grass grow while the robot deliberated its next 6-inch movement. We are talking about a vehicle designed to navigate battlefields, yet its brain operated at the speed of a philosophical debate. Furthermore, the proposal recognized the limitations of a single sensor fusion. A camera alone wasn't enough. They needed active sensing. This meant integrating early forms of ultrasonic sensors, like advanced bat sonar, and primitive laser rangefinders. These devices were massive, cumbersome, and often unreliable. They had to figure out how to fuse data from a 2D camera image with sparse 3D distance measurements from a laser to create a coherent world model. This challenge, combining disparate sensor inputs into a single, reliable environmental representation, remains a fundamental problem in robotics and autonomous driving today. The DARPA engineers of 1975 weren't just building a car, they were trying to give sight to the blind, on a budget of computation that would barely power a modern smart light bulb. Chapter 4: The Strategic Computing Initiative, the $600 million bet. The 1975 DARPA proposal wasn't a dead end. Instead, it proved to be a critical seed, a conceptual blueprint that would blossom into one of the most ambitious and transformative government programs in the history of computing, the Strategic Computing Initiative, SCI. By the early 1980s, the initial enthusiasm for AI had waned somewhat, a period later dubbed the AI winter by some critics. Funding was tightening, and the grand promises of the 60s and 70s seemed far from realization. Yet, within DARPA, a tenacious group of program managers and visionaries held firm. They successfully argued to Congress that artificial intelligence was not merely an academic pursuit but a new frontier in geopolitical power, on par with the space race or nuclear arms development. It was the new nuclear race, they declared, this time in silicon. In 1983, Congress approved the SCI, injecting hundreds of millions of dollars, an unprecedented sum for AI research at the time, totaling over $600 million over 5 years. This massive investment was structured around three ambitious, interconnected goals. One was the Pilot's Associate, an AI co-pilot for advanced fighter jets. The second was a battle management system for the U.S. Navy, designed to process vast amounts of battlefield data in real time. But the third, the true jewel in the SCI's crown, was the Autonomous Land Vehicle, ALV, the direct physical embodiment of that audacious 1975 concept. The ALV was no ordinary vehicle. It was a massive, 8-wheeled monster, resembling a cross between a military transport and a mobile research laboratory. Painted in a distinctive blue and white livery, it became the iconic symbol of DARPA's AI ambitions. Inside, it was a cathedral of early supercomputing. It housed racks of specialized processors, including the VICM image processor for vision and the pioneering Warp systolic array computer developed by Carnegie Mellon University. The Warp was a parallel processing marvel, a precursor to the modern GPU, designed specifically to handle the immense computational demands of real-time image processing for navigation. In 1985, on a carefully prepared test track at the Martin Marietta facilities in Denver, Colorado, the ALV achieved a historic world first. It autonomously followed a paved road for over a kilometer. There was no human driver, no remote control. It navigated solely by its onboard sensors and computational logic, directly fulfilling the spirit of the 1975 proposal. This moment was the moon landing for autonomous vehicles, proof that the ghost in the machine could indeed perceive and move through the physical world. However, the ALV also brought forth new challenges and revealing details. Its brain was so heavy and generated such enormous amounts of heat that the entire interior of the vehicle had to be aggressively air-conditioned, often to subarctic temperatures, just to prevent the processors from melting down. The ALV famously consumed more energy to think than it did to move. This stark reality highlighted the critical need for more efficient, compact, and powerful computing hardware, a direct catalyst for future developments in microelectronics. The SCI proved the 1975 vision was achievable, but also unveiled the vast chasm between laboratory dreams and deployable reality. It underscored that the complexity of the real world, with its endless variations in light, shadow, terrain, and unexpected obstacles, was far more formidable than any computer program could easily model. The journey to true autonomy would be a marathon, not a sprint. Chapter 5: The Algorithmic Soul, Solving the Common Sense Problem. Host, welcome back. If you're just joining us on Synapse Daily, we are dissecting the 1975 DARPA autonomous vehicle proposal, the DNA of every self-driving car on the road today. We've talked about the hardware, but now we need to talk about the soul of the machine, the algorithms. In 1975, the engineers weren't just fighting slow processors, they were fighting a philosophical wall. How do you program intuition? Yeni Penserit Asselir. Shutterstock. The 1975 proposal leaned heavily on a breakthrough that is still taught in every AI classroom today, the A*STAR, Search Algorithm Star. Developed at SRI International, this was the first time a machine was given a mathematical way to find the shortest path in a complex environment. But there was a catch. To an A** algorithm, the world is a grid. In 1975, the grid had to be incredibly simple because the memory, the RAM of the computers was measured in kilobytes. Imagine trying to navigate a forest, but you can only remember the last 3 steps you took and the next 2 steps ahead. That was the reality. The proposal suggested a hierarchical control architecture. This meant the vehicle had a brain that planned the long-term route and a reflex system that handled immediate obstacles. This mirrors the human nervous system. When you walk, you don't consciously think about every muscle fiber in your leg. Your spinal cord handles the balance, while your brain thinks about the destination. DARPA was trying to build a digital spine. They were creating the first behavioral robotics. It wasn't about math alone, it was about mimicking biology with vacuum tubes and early transistors. Chapter 6: The CMU Connection and the Terragator. You cannot tell the story of the 1975 DARPA vision without mentioning Carnegie Mellon University, CMU. Following the proposal, DARPA funneled resources into the Robotics Institute at CMU. This led to the creation of the Terragator, short for Terrestrial Aggregator. The Terragator was a six-wheeled robot that looked like a high-tech refrigerator on wheels. It was the world's first autonomous outdoor robot. In the late 70s and early 80s, if you walked across the CMU campus, you might have seen this beast crawling at a glacial pace, tethered to a giant mainframe via a thick umbilical cord of cables. Why the cables? Because the brain was still too big to fit on the body. The Terragator had to send its camera feed through a cable to a massive computer in a nearby building, wait for the computer to think, and then receive the command to move forward 6 inches. This era taught DARPA a hard lesson: latency is lethal. If the processing delay was 2 seconds, but the vehicle was moving at 5 miles per hour, it would hit a tree before it even realized the tree was there. This led to the 1975 proposal's most controversial requirement: the need for real-time parallel processing. This wasn't just a request for faster computers, it was a demand for a completely new architecture of computing that didn't exist yet. Chapter 7: The Sensor War, LiDAR's Primitive Ancestor. We often hear about LiDAR, light detection and ranging, as the eyes of modern AI. But in the 1975 concept, LiDAR was a dream that felt like science fiction. The early DARPA researchers experimented with scanning laser rangefinders. These devices were massive. They used rotating mirrors and high-powered gas lasers that were so heavy they shifted the center of gravity of the vehicle. The data they produced was point clouds, but back then, a point cloud consisted of maybe 100 points. Today, a Waymo car processes millions of points per second. In 1975, they were trying to reconstruct an entire 3D world from a handful of dots. There was a secret war inside DARPA, the visionaries versus the sensorists. The visionaries believed that if the AI was smart enough, it only needed a simple camera, just like a human eye. The sensorists argued that a computer would never understand a 2D image, so it needed active lasers to feel the distance. This debate is still happening today. Elon Musk and Tesla famously side with the visionaries, refusing to use LiDAR, while almost every other company sides with the sensorists. It is incredible to think that the core technical divide of 2026 was already a heated argument in a Pentagon briefing room in 1975. Chapter 8: The Hidden Failures and That AI Winter. History books love a success story, but the 1975 proposal led to some spectacular, and frankly hilarious, failures. There were test runs where the vehicle would see a tumbleweed and treat it like a granite boulder, coming to a screeching halt. There were moments when the sun would set, and the change in shadows would make the vehicle believe the road had turned into a bottomless pit. By the late 70s, the initial hype began to fade. This period is known as the AI winter. Critics in Congress began to ask, "We've given you millions. Why do we only have a van that moves slower than a toddler?" The 1975 concept was almost killed. The dream of autonomous tanks was mocked as gold-plated gadgetry. But a few key program managers at DARPA held the line. They argued that the failure wasn't in the idea, but in the silicon. They realized they were waiting for Moore's law to catch up. They had the maps, they just didn't have the engine. This period was crucial because it forced the researchers to move away from hard-coded logic, if X, then do Y, and move toward probabilistic reasoning. They started teaching computers to say, "I am 80% sure that is a road." This shift from certainty to probability is the foundation of modern machine learning. Chapter 9: The Ghost in the Desert, a Legacy Confirmed. As we move toward the conclusion of this era, we see the transition from the 1975 proposal to the Autonomous Land Vehicle (ALV) project of the 1980s. The ALV was a 15,000-pound monster. It was the first time they managed to put the brain inside the body. They used a custom-built computer called the Warp, which was a precursor to the modern AI chips, TPUs and GPUs, we use today. In 1987, the ALV achieved a speed of 20 kilometers per hour on a paved road. To the engineers who wrote that 1975 proposal, This was their moon landing. It proved that a machine could navigate the physical world using only its own onboard sensors and logic. Chapter 10, The Architect of Perception, Hans Moravec and the Stanford Cart. Welcome back. As we approach the final stretch of our journey into DARPA's 1975 genesis, we have to talk about the man who saw the world through the eyes of a machine before machines even had eyes, Hans Moravec. While DARPA was drafting the formal proposals in Washington, Moravec was at the Stanford AI Lab, SAIL, working on what would become the legendary Stanford Cart. In 1975, this project became a cornerstone of DARPA's autonomous research. The cart was a spindly, four-wheeled vehicle with a television camera on a rail. But here is the detail that will blow your mind: to navigate a room full of chairs, the Stanford Cart had to stop every few inches, take a picture, and send that picture to a PDP-10 mainframe. The computer would spend 15 minutes analyzing the image to find landmarks. It would then move the cart another meter, and the process would repeat. It took 5 hours to cross a 20-meter room. Moravec's work in 1975 was crucial because it birthed the concept of 3D occupancy grids. He realized that a robot didn't need to know what a chair was, it just needed to know that a certain coordinate in space was occupied by a solid object. This map-as-you-go philosophy is the exact same logic used by your Roomba vacuum or a sophisticated military drone today. The 1975 DARPA proposal integrated these findings, moving away from simple pre-programmed paths toward dynamic mapping. They were teaching a machine to build its own reality from scratch. It was the moment the vehicle stopped being a puppet and started being a pilot. Chapter 11, The Secret Hardware, the VAX-11/780 and the Lisp machines. You can't talk about the 1975 proposal without talking about the iron that made it possible. We often focus on the software, but in the mid to late 70s, the hardware was a battlefield of its own. DARPA's vision required a specific type of thinking. Standard computers of the time were built for math, adding long strings of numbers. But AI needs symbolic processing. This led to the rise of Lisp machines. These were specialized computers designed specifically to run the Lisp programming language, the lingua franca of AI at the time. The 1975 proposal sparked a massive investment in the VAX-11/780 mini computer. This was the workhorse of the early autonomous era. It was the size of 2 large refrigerators and cost over $100,000 in 1975 money. DARPA's commitment to this hardware was a gamble. If AI didn't work, they were left with millions of dollars of specialized junk. But the gamble paid off in unexpected ways. The need to process visual data for the autonomous vehicle concept led to breakthroughs in parallel architecture. The DARPA engineers realized that a single processor, serial processing, could never see fast enough. They needed hundreds of small processors working together. This is the direct evolutionary ancestor of the NVIDIA GPUs that power the AI revolution today. Every time you see a neural engine mentioned in a smartphone keynote, you are seeing the shadow of a hardware requirement first written in a DARPA memo in 1975. Chapter 12, From 1975 to 2075, The Half-Century Echo. We have reached the end of our deep dive. Let's bring it all home. In 1975, the DARPA autonomous vehicle concept was a moonshot. Most people in the Pentagon thought it was a waste of taxpayer money. They saw a slow, clunky van that couldn't handle a rainy day. But those visionaries weren't looking at the van, they were looking at the logic. The 1975 proposal was the bridge. It took the theoretical AI of the 1950s, Turing, McCarthy, Minsky, and forced it to confront the messy, dirty, unpredictable physical world. It taught us that intelligence isn't just playing chess, it's the ability to drive through a mud puddle without getting stuck. In 2004, when DARPA launched the Grand Challenge in the Mojave Desert, the world was shocked that a car could drive 150 miles across the desert alone. But the engineers who were there, the veterans of the 70s, weren't shocked. They had been waiting for that day for 30 years. They knew the ghost in the machine just needed a faster brain. Today, we stand on the precipice of Level 5 autonomy. We see air taxis, autonomous delivery drones, and self-driving semi-trucks. It's easy to think this all started with Silicon Valley 10 years ago. But the truth is much more fascinating. It started in 1975, fueled by Cold War fears, running on computers that filled rooms, and driven by men and women who dared to believe that a machine could have a sense of direction. As we look toward 2075, another 50 years into the future, what are the impossible concepts being proposed today that our grandchildren will take for granted? Is it telepathic AI? Fully autonomous cities? Deep space exploration probes? The lesson of 1975 is simple: the future doesn't happen by accident. It is proposed, funded, and built by those who see what isn't there. Thank you for joining us on this marathon journey through history. This has been Synapse Daily. Like this video if you learned something new. The history of technology is deeper than you think. Comment your thoughts below. Do you think the 1975 engineers would be disappointed or amazed by where we are today? Subscribe for more fascinating stories of the ghosts in our machines. See you in the next episode.